Welcome, everyone, to the webinar, Connected Cars, New Challenges and Opportunities, jointly organized by LESI, Patent and Technology Licensing Committee, and 4IP Council. For those who are not familiar with 4IP Council, well, let me start by saying I'm Claudia Tapia. I'm the president of 4IP Council and will be the one moderating today. And 4IP Council is a not-for-profit research council, which is focused on the link on IP and innovation. And you can find in the website a variety of free materials, summaries of papers, interactive guidelines, and graphics, interviews to inspire small and medium enterprises, webinars like this one today. I would like to remind you that this webinar will be recorded. And if you have questions, please send them in the chat and I will be raising them later on after the presentation. We have also a few questions myself, but I would like really to encourage you to raise questions in the chat so that we can have a lively discussion. So today we have an amazing panel. We have on the one hand, Bowman Heiden, who, as you know, some of you, has many hats. He is a co-director of the Center of Intellectual Property, CIP. He is also a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. He directs the Impact Accelerator at the Zagrenska School of Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and during his career, he has managed over 100 innovation projects with industry, university, research institutes, health providers, and startups. He was also one of the experts appointed by the European Commission to analyze the licensing and valuation of standard essential patents. Then we have also Laurie Fitzgerald, I hope I pronounced it correctly, who is Vice President Senior Vice President, apologies, of Avanci. And well, she is a patent professional, licensing professional, IP attorney, has more than a decade of experience in resolving disputes between patent holders and technology developers. Her expertise spans licensing, transactions, patent acquisition, and divestitures, portfolio strategy, valuation, and patent litigation. And she features in the IAM Strategy 300 list of leading IP professionals and is among World IP Review's most influential women in IP. And finally, we have Steve Faraji from Audi. He's head of patents vehicle production and Chief IPR Policy Manager at Audi AG in Neckarsum, Germany. He's a qualified German and European patent attorney specializing in computer implementing inventions and software. Steve advises on licensing issues, in particular regarding standard essential patents in the automotive industry. And prior to joining Audi, he worked on prosecution and litigation of ICT patents for a major patent law firm in Munich. So that's a quite impressive panel. I'm super excited that you all agree to come today and in this webinar and share your views. And we will start today with a short presentation of Bowman, and we will continue then with the Q&A session because the goal is to have as much interactive session as possible. I had the opportunity to talk to the panelists yesterday, and I thought I really don't need to moderate much because they all have a lot of things to say, a lot of interesting things to say. But let's start with Bo. Bo, please go ahead.
Great. You see it okay now? Is that good? All right, great. Thanks a lot. I'm tired now after all when you introduced me, it sounded like I have a lot of work to do. So you reminded me of that. So now thanks again for being here. I'm just going to try to do some short introduction to frame a bit of the issues, some some of my research and some of the ways that I think that are to kind of get at the heart of the challenges that we have, where I think that everyone is, working very hard to try to find ways to overcome these challenges. And we definitely need creativity to do that, because this type of activity with open innovation and different actors is, of course, quite complex, but produces a lot of value for society. So this is definitely something that we want to work on that produces value for everyone. So we should do it together. So just quickly then, starting with a little bit of an introduction to the value of automotive connectivity. I wrote a paper in 2019 around this. My goal wasn't to say who should get what value. That's like the third rail. You shouldn't grab a hold of that if you don't have to, but to say how much value is created and how much value could be created. And I think that's a good place to start. And then we can decide who should get it. So is there a lot of value? Well, you didn't have to go very far. When I did my study, I read all the annual reports of all the major automotive companies, and they all looked a little bit like this statement from Herbert Dice. I put this up there just for Steve, and where he makes quite clear in the annual report that connectivity is very important. I think there's 3 or 4 pages dedicated in Toyota's annual report. Most actors are saying something like this. So on the top level of companies, it seems they are telling their shareholders that this is extremely important. So they believe that that there's value created, and the value is going to come over time, right? So when I wrote this in 2019, now it's 2022. Things have moved forward, but basically, the initial area of connectivity in automotive was basic safety, e-call, and also value-added complementary services. And this produces a certain value, but again, complementary to the normal use of the car. And I'll talk a little bit about what the value of that is, just isolated from the car itself. But I think that in the future, you won't be able to isolate connectivity from the overall car itself, because it will be a major system that defines the core vehicle functionality as we move forward, especially with V2X and automation. It'll be less likely to call this a complementary solution to the car, and more as a core functionality that drives safety and performance. So 3 years ago, I looked at these numbers. They've probably gone up a bit since then. But just being very, very cautious, very conservative, looking at just the value created from the hardware and the services that were reported by car companies, just for connectivity, not for the whole car, just connectivity. I calculated between $590 and $670 for connected cars, just based on this complementary use of connectivity in automotive. As we move further, though, as we said, the future, the vehicle as a connectivity-enabled value proposition, then the car itself will be connectivity at the core. This comes, as I mentioned, with the implementation of V2X. It comes with autonomous driving, but there's also going to be a lot of a big increase in positive externalities, as mentioned here. Lots of lives being saved, lots of accidents being not happening, avoiding a lot of carbon emissions, and saving a lot of people from driving time. This number of $250 billion by 2025 is maybe a little bit premature. But again, the reason I bring this up is that all of these things were mentioned by Bosch in one of their publications. So again, this is the automotive industry talking about the value that connectivity will bring to the automotive industry. It's not the connectivity people saying what it brings. This is what the automotive people are saying about it. So again, it's easy to see that there's a lot of value that can be generated. This value will then need the decision on where does it go? Does it go to the people that create the technology, the people that produce the products and services, or is it given to the consumers as consumer surplus? It has to go somewhere, right? So this is the next thing to discuss. But we can see that the good news is that there's a lot of value created by this, and that's very positive. The last one is the most recent value numbers from strategy analytics. I put up here, I don't know the underlying calculation for these, but the reason I put this up is because it does also relate to this idea of stakeholders. So people, not only will the consumer generate value through connectivity, but also car makers as well, and possibly dealers. So this is something that the value will be captured in different ways. And that, of course, opens up for complexities when it comes to licensing. Will be captured at the sale of an automobile, will be captured through services and subscriptions that come later. How should that all be handled? That's what makes all of our lives fun and interesting, trying to answer these questions. All right, so that's just quickly on, is there a lot of value? And I should have a slide that says, yes, lots of value. That's good. So, so the next part is that, why is this a little bit difficult? And I wrote a paper, well, I wrote it for IM magazine on overcoming the prisoner's dilemma in SEP licensing, which is a little bit described by the movie A Beautiful Mind. So for those of you that watched that movie, John Nash is in a bar in Princeton, and he has this epiphany where he comes to the conclusion that Adam Smith was wrong, which is tough on Adam Smith. He was right about a lot of things, but the idea of the invisible hand, that everyone should look in their own self-interest and that will maximize everyone's benefit. He came to the conclusion that no, in certain circumstances, people need to maximize their own interest in the interest of the group in order to create the most value for society. And I think when it comes to open standardization, that this is a classic example. Everybody benefits by looking out for themselves, but out for everybody. If you only look out for yourself, you're going to sub-optimize the value for yourself and for everybody else. And so how does this manifest itself in SEPs? Well, when we try to get people to participate, whether they're on the seller side, the licensor side, or the buyer side, it looks a lot like platforms, just like Uber or Facebook or any other type of platform where you have multi-sided markets. How do you bring in both of these actors? It's a chicken and egg issue that's always discussed. And not only between the sellers and the buyers, these cross-side network effects, but also how do you get the actors themselves, the buyers and the sellers, to join because of their own heterogeneity. So you have both this, how do you set up the system to get more buyers to come in when there's other buyers there? Who's going to come first? Who else is going to come? Same thing with the sellers. And how do you get them to join the platform in balance with cross network effects between sellers and buyers? This would be something interesting for us to talk about, because I know this is some of the issues. And so just quickly, the heterogeneity challenge, you have people that implement and you have people that produce SEPs, but they're not only separate people, right? You have the ones up here in the top that are both implementers and SEP holders. And to make it even more tricky, the people in this box are not homogeneous either. They're different from each other, right? And these are different from each other, and these are different from each other. And then, of course, you have the long tail. So you have a lot of heterogeneity. And how are you going to get all these different heterogeneous actors to agree to do something all at once? So a little bit of the conceptualization is that maybe in the long term, if everybody was all licensors were there and all licensees were there, we could all agree if everyone was there, this would be the long-term royalty rate. But in the short term, we can't agree because the licensors say, hey, there's not a lot of people there, we need a higher rate. And the licensee says, well, I'm not going to pay much until all the other licensees are there, so I want a lower rate. So these are the little collective action problems that are all over society. These are not collective action problems, they're everywhere. How to get everyone on board. And of course, people are creating clever ways to do this. I wrote my paper about Sysfel. We have Avanci here as well that's coming up with clever platform ideas. So with that, I hand it over to the panel to discuss, and hopefully this was a helpful introduction.
Thank you so much. Maybe you can stop sharing screen.
I'll do that. There we go.
Everybody can see you better. And again, I would like to encourage everyone to raise questions in the chat. And until then, I will raise also my questions. Please write them since we are a large group. So we will deal with the written questions. And in this case, let me start with the first question, which is regarding the benefits for consumers. You were talking about mobility safety. I understand also entertainment. Is there anything else? And this question goes more for Steve and Laurie, that you can come up with regarding the benefits for consumers that you would like to share.
You can start, Laurie, if you want to.
I mean, I think that the benefits are, Bo summarized them fairly well. They're also in the strategy analytics paper that was shown in his presentation is from the Avanci website. But I think that connectivity for consumers, I mean, there are a host of additional safety applications. There is more immersive entertainment or infotainment experience available. There, when we're driving these days, we're completely connected. We have, we know what traffic is coming up ahead, where there's construction. So I think all of that goes into safety. You can manage traffic in a way that's better for the environment and all of us as a result. So I think one thing I'll say here, though, with regards to the benefits that connectivity brings to an automobile is I am constantly amazed by the things that the auto industry, what they are innovating on top of connectivity. So, at Avanci, we license connectivity, the standard essential technology, to the auto industry, who then uses that connectivity to innovate even further. And so I have the, I suppose, privileged place in my role at Avanci to get to see two incredibly innovative industries, telecom and automotive, coming together, having a synergy, and then coming up with even more benefits for consumers, for drivers, for the automakers, for society generally. So it's just really amazing. I think with 5G, we're going to see even more.
Indeed. Steve?
Yeah, perhaps to add to that, and thank you, Claudia, and the organizers for inviting us to this nice panel and this event. So on the points of Bowman and Laurie, perhaps I might add, or perhaps also say, if we talk about connectivity, this is more or less a little bit vague point, because we certainly also look at 5G now at the moment, which is increased capabilities in technology. However, we are already using and proliferated a lot of 4G connectivity, which also might be able at the moment to cover all the use cases and technologies we need for the consumers on the V2X area, for example. So there is certainly a step, and there's certainly a great value of connectivity for cars. But as Laurie has indicated, I'm very thankful for that. There is not only the let's say innovators or licensors who have developed technology in the ICT area and cellular communications, which have a part in this, but also the automotive companies and also suppliers who are developing a lot of functionalities in this area. So, Bo, perhaps it's a little bit too black and white to just mention the numbers of such and such billion comes out of connectivity, because I don't think it's so easy to just calculate it down to what the benefit of it is. But if you do so, I think it's fair to say that there is a big group of companies, not only the cellular communication development companies, who are supporting this and adding to these technologies. Thank you.
And Steve, thank you so much. I think in this case, not everybody was joining the previous training, but if you have been, Bowman explained exactly that there is innovation created by both sides, and that it was important to divide this value amongst both players. So I see here we have in the chat a question regarding the papers, and I do not have to do anything. Someone already reacted and shared the link, so thanks so much for it. I see one question. I'm not sure how related it is to the topic today. I'm going to raise it in case that you feel comfortable to answer it we will answer it. Otherwise, we will move to another question. The question is how satellite saturation connectivity in the Earth's atmosphere will affect automotive functionality.
I think that's for Steve.
I'm really sorry, but it's my area of expertise is more in the patent law, and I cannot respond to that. I'm sorry for that. But I can certainly check. Sorry.
We will collect the questions, and maybe we can then contact.
Yeah, Claudia, if I may ask a question, I have some questions for Bo regarding his prisoner's dilemma topic.
That's great. Please go ahead.
So there is one question I have also in the beginning of this conference before a little bit I chat with Laurie also. You have made a slight qualification of this heterogeneity topic. Could you qualify, Bo, how you see the automotive ecosystem, SEP ecosystem, Avanci automotive companies? How would you qualify how great this heterogeneity is? And could you compare it to other industries or other similar cases?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we wrote, it's always good to, it's a good academic question. You actually, it's good that I don't have you as an academic advisor. That's, but you should, yeah, so that's the kind of question.
I'm available anytime.
That's the kind of one I would get in the academy. But when you read the report, you'll see that I tried to make it general because I think this is a general issue, but we did focus a bit on Wi-Fi 6, which has its own unique characteristics. I think if we look at automotive, it's a, you tell me whether I'm right or wrong here, Steve. There's not a lot of people that are both SEP owners and producing automotive, at least at present. There's a little bit more separation than in other areas, right? So I'm not saying this completely. I'm just saying that then in say Wi-Fi, or Samsung produces devices and has a lot of SEPs. Ericsson does infrastructure and has So the heterogeneity for me is a little bit less and could be less in certain IoT areas where there could be more pure play implementers and more people that at least towards those actors look like pure play licensors, because they might sell products, but not products in that market. In other words, Ericsson is selling infrastructure in a mobile system, but infrastructure isn't really part of the mobile value, or the automotive value chain in that way. So it could be a little bit more clean between licensees and licensors, but maybe Laurie would also be able to see whether how that is and how that's likely going to change as you move into other areas of IoT, possibly. Was that good enough, Steve? Sorry, it's all right. Yeah,
perfect.
Okay. Yeah.
At least just from our experience at Avanci right now, thinking about the idea of both sides, we do not presently have any company that is a licensee and a licensor in the platform. But like you said, Bo, perhaps that could change going forward. And it's certainly possible with our structure. There's no restriction on who can join as a licensor if they own SEPs.
And it's funny too, because if you have a huge exposure like a Samsung, right, then you tend to sequester with the implementers, even though you have a lot of SEPs. So it creates different types of people joining together in these different configurations.
Yeah, Claudia, I have a couple of more questions, but there is a question in the chat. Perhaps we can take that first.
In the chat, and I would like to also raise one question, since we were having focus in consumers and also in the benefits the automotive received. But I wonder, these two worlds were merging. Suddenly we have telecoms and then we have automotive. And of course we had from the telecom side some challenges, but which were the challenges that you faced when you were approached years ago to take a license? And which of them are still pending?
Is this directed to me, Claudia?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. At the beginning, I mean, the challenge is as natural for anyone who is implementing a technology and is then faced with potential patents. And here in this regard, standard essential patents, there is a kind of let's say an educational process on how licensing can be taken into account. As you have mentioned, the automotive industry traditionally had a different licensing ecosystem or model where the suppliers amongst each others did a lot of cross-licensing as well as the automotive OEM. So you stayed on the vertical level. And then you have the challenge of a technology implemented, which we don't have that many experts on to perhaps also assess and evaluate the patent portfolios we are looking at. So if a patent owner, a potential licensor comes to us, you have an offer and you have a patent portfolio which you have at least to look at and evaluate. So this was a challenge. This might still be a challenge, but I mean, this is not something you cannot resolve. I mean, we have we have our own expert knowledge now in specific areas, and you have the possibility to circumvent specific problems we look at. I mean, I think we all agree also in the end, it's for any party engaging in a licensing negotiation, it's a business decision in the end. And so a challenge is probably for any company, be it a potential licensee or licensor, to come up with a potential aggregate royalty rate for a technology. And I think it's specifically important in the SAP area. And the challenge, I think, is now to look at 5G. I don't want to talk about the history, 4G, we have Avanci as a potential solution and also a licensing platform, which at some point proposed license rates. And we have to look at now 5G, what will come there and what will be offered. And I think this is also a huge responsibility for all the players to come up with interesting, fair royalty rates, as Bowman has indicated, where perhaps everyone has some hurt and has a lot of pain, but still is it's acceptable for all parties in the negotiations.
Thanks, Steve. And
I said it the other way, Steve. There's lots of value for everyone. I didn't say pain.
Everyone's sharing the cake. Yes. Okay.
Exactly. Sharing. So, Laurie, we have heard several times Avanci. I'm not sure how many people here in the audience know what is Avanci about. For me, it's clearly a success story. We hear about 85% of the patents that will be needed and of the car manufacturers around that figure. So could you maybe tell us a bit which were the creation, what has been done till now, and then maybe also to Steve's question, anything that you can share on 5G?
Yeah, and I know we don't have that much time, so I'll, for those of you who don't know Avanci or what we do, Avanci started in 2016, and the idea was to create a one-stop shop. So to create a platform where standard essential patent owners, 2G, 3G, 4G, could join as licensors together, put their patents into a joint license. And then IoT companies, and particularly automakers, was where we started, could come to Avanci and take, one agreement and obtain a license to all of the licensors' cellular SCPs at one time in a single transaction. So the idea was to be simple and efficient. It turns out that getting to where we are today was not so simple. But, it took a lot of work, I think, to probably face the prisoner's dilemma that Bo talked about a bit, there to create consensus and a collective solution, you really need wide support on both sides. And what I have learned is, the key to doing it is finding that set of licensing terms that can be widely accepted by potential licensors and potential licensees. And what Steve was discussing about sort of the historical licensing practices in the automotive industry, that was a big challenge for Avanci, because the telecom industry had very different historical licensing practices, and there had to be compromise on both sides. And we did come up with it after a lot of talking to stakeholders, all around. We presented a set of licensing terms and offered them to the industry. And it was a set of terms that in our independent judgment, we thought could be widely accepted. And the licensors who participate in Avanci, today there are 51 of them who own, I think by a lot of third-party studies, over 80% of the SCPs, 3G, 4G. They had to make a lot of compromises because they're agreeing to license their patents on a set of terms that might not match up with exactly how they would do it in an individual discussion. And they give some control to the platform to go and license their patents, which in a lot of cases isn't something that they would usually do. Then on the other side of the platform, you have the automakers who have different licensing practices, and they make compromises when they take a license that is essentially a form. And they're agreeing to terms and conditions and maybe a price that is not what they want. But today we have more than 80 automotive brands under license. And so that's the 85% that figure, Claudia, that you used. And we have achieved a consensus across automakers and standard essential patent owners. And, I think we've learned a lot of lessons in 4G, and which leads us now to 5G, where we will, I think, fairly soon. We're working now to finalize the terms of the 5G program. We'll announce them when they're ready. And we're working real hard right now on that set of terms that we believe can be widely accepted by both the licensors and the licensees for 5G automotive. And hopefully, the goal certainly is always to have 100% of the patents and 100% of the vehicles. But I'm sure it will be, another round of hard work. Mm-hmm. Because of, this prisoner's dilemma, everyone is different. The patent owners are 51 very different companies who have different priorities, and each automotive brand is a very different company as well. They're based all around the world. And finding that point where everyone can not necessarily agree, I don't like to use that word, but compromise is when it happens, it's amazing.
Yes, thanks, Laurie, and congratulations for the success of Avanci. You mentioned it took a little bit more than originally thought. From the moment you created Avanci until the first license, how long did it take?
Yeah, the first license was signed in late 2017. And so it was maybe around a year. Then, though, there was another long period until the next licenses were signed, and then again another couple of years. And so it's really been the last year when most of the licenses have been signed. So more than 5 years it took to sort of go from licensee number 1 to the 80 plus brands where we are today. And it was, I think, just a lot of, we wanted to level the playing field. Once we had one licensee in the auto industry, of course, it's fair to them that their competitors are also licensing and paying for SCPs. But like I said before, they're very different companies from different countries with different priorities, and Avanci is only an option. No one has to take an Avanci license. You're always, bilateral licensing is historically the way that this is done, and that remains available. So I think there was a lot of decision making within the auto industry on how to go about this, and this wasn't something new for them, and it took time. The patent owners, though, it was a very small group of patent owners at the beginning, so it's been exactly the same on the other side, the prisoner's dilemma there. I think some patent owners wanted to wait and see if everyone else joined. And it took a while for us to convince I think, a critical mass of licensors to join us as well, because it was new for them too. And so this is it's not I think some people think that one side of this is easy or the other side, but really it's equally complicated on both sides of the platform to get that critical mass.
Indeed.
But I think we are proof of concept that it can be done.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Laurie. We have, in the meantime, quite some questions in the chat, so I would like to go directly to them. The first one, I think it's more technical, so probably Steve, if you feel comfortable answering, let me know. The question is, especially the energy crisis, do you think the hyperconnectivity in a domain such as automotive is still beneficial for consumers and should still be developed in an energy consumption point of view because of the data processing, servers, and so on?
Yeah, this is again a question which I to be honest, I'm not really comfortable to respond to, but I would argue that there might be even possibly also a reduced consumption of energy if you introduced specific technologies which is more advanced. I don't necessarily see that now, you know, as I don't have the background in the connectivity space, but the development itself, I think, makes sense. And I mean, it's not only true for automotive. If this were the case, as Mathilde has written, that also would be the case for handhelds and other technology, other products which implement this technology. So I'm not really, as I said, I'm a patent attorney. I'm not really comfortable to respond, but I try my best.
Yes, I think you're making it really hard for Steve today.
I can add something to that too. Steve's like, I'm just a patent attorney. Come on now. It's like, you're a patent attorney, Steve. Come on, it's like this. Da-da.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I think what Steve said was correct, right? I mean, if you're going to still have cars, connectivity is only going to help to solve some of these issues as it gets better. Hopefully, like the slide that I put up which was from Bosch, less accidents, less carbon emissions, less people having to drive. That's positive, right? I mean, zooming is probably better on the environment in some way.
But I mean, the question is fair.
But not on the soul, not on the soul, right?
You're right. But I mean, the question is fair, and I think, you know, you could dive in if you have the background in technology and perhaps to assess it also economically, whether there is some consequences. Yeah.
We have one question, which I think it's going to be much easier to answer for all of you, which is the royalty rate always the most difficult point to agree upon in the set of terms?
Absolutely not. You know, it's actually something that, you know, before I worked with automotive licensing, I spent a lot of years, you know, licensing in sort of the mobile device industry. And this is probably something that I was surprised about. I mean, yes, sometimes the royalty rate is the most difficult term to agree upon, but it's not always, and frequently it's not. So I think that, you know, a license agreement is a whole set of terms and conditions, and a lot of times I think that gets lost in discussions. We talk a lot about the price. There's also been a lot of talk about the level of the license, but there's an entire document and lots of different conditions that go into a license, and people are obligating themselves to do things, and they're also giving up, you know, or granting rights. And so in what is been interesting to me in dealing with so many different potential licensees is that it's really different for everyone. Every company has, it seems to me, sort of a different term that is important to them. And same exact thing on the licensor side. And so that's, yeah, my answer would be absolutely no, surprisingly so.
The others, do you agree? Should we move to the next question, or do you have anything that you would like to complement?
There is a difference between Laurie speaks for a licensing platform, and I think in bilateral negotiations, it might be one of the really contentious points, but it depends really on the negotiations in licensing. It's one of the most important points, but I mean, for Laurie and the licensing platform, this is more or less in a certain way set. So the discussion perhaps she will have between the licensing platform and the licensors who want their fair share, that might be possible. But the licensing rate and the royalty rate is definitely one of the difficult points to agree on in bilateral negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
I can just add, I always think that price is important, although I know that from Laurie's experience, when you get down into it, there's so many other things as well. My joke is always that no one argues over the terms of a royalty-free license, but so at some price there isn't really any discussion. But I think also as we move into IoT, there's norms, industry norms, and I think Steve brought this up, and I think Laurie has suffered through this as well, is that people are used to doing things differently. And, you know, you bring two groups of actors together that have done things for decades in a certain way, and you either have to come up with new norms or someone has to adopt somebody else's norms. And that's going to happen a lot in all these different verticals. Every sector has its own norms. And that's probably one of the things to focus a lot on, as well as price on some level.
And
any price above zero, let's call it that.
And if I may add something, Claudia, to Bo's statement as well. I mean, we shouldn't forget that we are talking also about a specific area of the patent law, which, you know, there is this challenge of, if you talk about a global portfolio license, and this is something that Avanci, for example, provides. And then you have on the other side, regional and national patent protection, and different companies, different licensors and licensees with different exposure in specific countries of production. So this is really, I would say, in both words, very heterogeneous. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And yeah, this is actually also something very interesting to take into account. I think it adds to the complexity of the whole issue.
I recall we had a discussion last time about you know, the challenge that Laurie was also mentioning. Who wants to be the first paying and taking a license, right? And not only the first convincing patent holders, this is a good thing to do. You're going to save money if you pull all the patents together, but also to the users to take a license. And this is can be a challenge. So a question to you: what can be done to incentivize SEP users to take a license at the early stage? And maybe we can start with Laurie and then continue to Bo and Steve. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question that I think about all the time. And like I described earlier, I mean, I do think that my colleagues who founded Avanci thought that if they offered it, everyone would join right away. And it turns out that was not true. It took time. And so thinking, you know, I've thought a lot about it is, you know, what created the point where the momentum started. I think that the wider acceptance you have, then you see more and more. I mean, maybe this is hard to explain, right? Because maybe it's not completely rational, but when you see your fellow SEP owners or your fellow automakers joining, I think this is the prisoner's dilemma, I suppose. Then you start to see, you know, okay, that if they're doing it, then maybe I should be interested in it too. But getting that going is so hard. I mean, I do think there has to be incentives to join early. Maybe it is a lower price at the start. I mean, Bowman wrote about this in the paper in regards, I think, to a different patent pool. There could, you know, or for the licensors, I think if you have licensees early on and a volume of products under license, well, certainly that is an incentive because the royalties are available. I mean, just one licensee might not be much of an incentive, but 10 licensees would be. And so it's a good question. I mean, I think for the licensors, it's having the products under license, and for the licensees, it's there probably being some financial advantage to going first and being early.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm open to suggestions.
Exactly. Now is the platform. Please go ahead. Bo, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Sure. Now, this is the issue, right? Who wants to go first? No one wants to jump in first. And actually, you would argue that in an automotive pool, that shouldn't have been as difficult because the $15 wasn't really an issue compared to the price of a car. You can see that this would be even more tricky if you were moving further upstream, where $15 would make a competitive difference for people trying to sell their components, right? So, so it tells you that even in relation to the price of the car, it's not easy to get people to pay $15. That tells you something, and that you need to do incentives. I created this strange, I talked about Fran for so long, I decided to move the words around, move the letters around a little bit. So I came up with this idea that reasonable and differentiated is fair. So RADIF. It hasn't caught on yet. Maybe now it will. But this idea that if people don't pay more in the end than in the beginning, because holdout, sorry to use jargon, is not only an issue for licensors, it's also a problem for licensees if they've paid, but the other competitors haven't, right? So that's the issue, right? Is that, so there has to be a penalty. Otherwise, it's not fair, right? You can't wait and then pay the same. That's not fair. So it's the revenge of the F in Fran for fair. We have to talk about fair when we talk about discriminatory.
While I massively disagree, Claudia, if I may say something also, I massively disagree with Bo's analogy to the car price.
Not just slightly,
no, crazily disagree. But he has a point. So I disagree really with the with the notion that the car price and the $15 is actually not really low for us. So really, there are car models which do not, you don't make a profit like in the hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. It's really. There is a point. I mean, Laurie knows this from negotiations, but where I agree with you is this level playing field argument. I mean, it's really in the interest of any licensee in any setting of licensing negotiations that the competition, or let's say the similarly situated companies, also take a license, because otherwise you are the one paying a license rate and the others don't, and this is competitively a disadvantage. That's for sure.
Steve, why did you say massively? We don't massively. We're very close to each other. I'm even willing to give you the point that a car company that doesn't make any money would be problematic for them. I'm happy to give that to you. So we agree on that too.
I do remember what former boss in BlackBerry who used to say, it's not so much about how much we pay. I want to make sure our competitors don't pay less or much less than us. So I think this is where the transparency of Avanci somehow helps. But I see in one of the comments, they were pointing out that the fact that you are increasingly getting licensees might be also due to the fact that you announced that you're going to increase that for $15 to $20. So maybe, Laurie, could you share a little bit the experience? How do you decide to do that, and what has changed in the behavior of licensees after you announced it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll begin by saying I cannot speak for why any individual licensee takes an Avanci license. I mean, that is a question for the licensee, and I don't want to pretend to put words in anyone's mouth on that one. So what I can speak though is why Avanci announced a price increase at the start of this past summer. And it was something that was decided not just by Avanci. We announced the price increase after many months and probably even more than that of discussion with participants in the platform. We really wanted to make sure that the program continued to thrive and have the scope to continue to provide a fair return for the existing licensors in the program, and also licensors that could join in the future. And while still reflecting, the value that our license provides to a licensee, I mean, I think since the time that we launched Avanci with less than a dozen licensors until today, the value of the license has significantly increased. And so in order to have a functioning, I think, platform, what we've learned is those terms have to reflect the balance, the compromise. And the $15, I think it needed to be increased so that it continued to reflect the value of the license to the licensees, and then also the fair return to the licensors. And so that's really the thinking. We gave notice of the price increase because we felt that raising the price overnight was not the best way to operate as a business. And so we gave, everyone plenty of notice and publicized it as much as we could and made sure that everyone was aware of it. And that's really how I would explain what happened.
Mm-hmm. In this case, because you were made all this information available, so there's clearly some transparency taking place. Do you think, and this goes for the three of you, that more transparency is needed? And if so, how would we get more transparency from Automotive and from SEP holders for 5G? So first, is it needed at all? Are we good? And second, if we need more transparency, what needs to be done?
I think I'm interested to hear maybe from Steve or Bowman on this one. It's, I think Avanci is always trying to bring more transparency. So I'm interested to hear, what else we could be doing if needed.
If I go first, Steve is going to then be able to counterpoint me again. So maybe Steve, you should go first this time.
No, I mean, Laurie, what would, for me personally, would be interesting regarding transparency. I don't know whether this is really a point hitting it, but the price increase from $15 to $20, the reasoning behind it would be very interesting. What your thought process was, because it a little bit came as a surprise, I think, for some market participants. So that would be interesting. I mean, on the transparency end for, let's say, potential licensees, I believe you have the IPR database within ETSI on SEPs. There is some discussions also with the European Commission with the IP action plan activities, where there is certainly some activities regarding potential essentiality checks on SEPs to provide a little bit more transparency on the validity or the essentiality of patents that are declared. That might be a point. And there's always a discussion on similarly situated companies, or let's say comparable license agreements. This is not really easy because, there is a lot of confidentiality agreements in place. I think also this is not specifically a problem of licensors, but also of potential licensees who also don't want necessarily to share all the information of license agreements. So transparency in that regard would definitely also be helpful to perhaps be able to evaluate what a licensor, for example, is offering as a license rate, to have that comparison, but it's not an easy thing to do. Now, Bo can disagree with me.
Massively no, so no, that's good.
Now it's your turn, Bo.
Yeah. I think that I believe in a pragmatic amount of transparency. I think Lou Zaretsky and I wrote an article as well on this. We work on this 5G transparency project together. I think there's a pragmatic amount of transparency. Transparency is not automatically something to maximize. When I do something wrong, I don't want to know what my wife is actually thinking in her head. So transparency is not the ultimate goal we're looking for all the time. And I think that Steve said that, there's going to be different actors that, it's not only one side that wants transparency. Usually everyone wants everything else to be open except their stuff to be closed, right? That's always the tricky part. But there is a certain amount that could facilitate transactions, I believe. Where that line is and who should have to bear the brunt of that, that's a question to be discussed, I think. But when it comes to Avanci, for example, my theory is that they kind of solve this, isn't it? I mean, if you get all the patents for a certain price, what are you concerned about when it comes to transparency anymore? It's if you take the thing off the table. Now essentiality is an issue between the licensors to see who gets what. The licensees, they don't need to worry about it. They get everything for the same price. So to me, it seems to eliminate that problem. I don't know, Laurie, what do you say? I'm pitching on your behalf.
No.
What do you say?
You have like literally 30 seconds to finish the, the webinar. And I have the feeling we could really talk for at least 1 hour more, and to have you agreed and strongly disagreed in some points. I would like to thank you all for being so active. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer to all the questions, but at least to some of them. And I'd like to also remind you that there is another webinar taking place on the 27th of October. Unfortunately, it's the wrong month written, but it's October. It's called IP waiver in pandemic times. I think it's a super hot topic, and to see what is going to be the impact to innovation and global public health and global collaboration, the patent system, and whether they are better rules, tools to prepare for the next pandemic, if we get one, when we get one. And so I encourage you to join also to that webinar. And I'd like to thank you again, audience and panelists, for this great contribution. And I hope to see you next time in another event. Thank everyone.
Thank you, Claudia, for the moderation. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Claudia.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.